Afriquetoday, our objective is to help you access trending information that is fresh and relevant in the promotion of African culture and values, as well as information that enhances economic, political, and social welfare in the continent. We provide a platform to share news, ideas, and useful information from different perspectives that reflect our African traditions such as music, art, and fashion, among others. With the dawn of the new year, Afriquetoday is here to deliver this information and more for you, our valued audience and stakeholders. We have spared no resources in refining our platform to make it better and look forward to serving your needs and you being part of a rejuvenated Africa that has so much to offer the world. Thank you for stopping by and Happy New Year, everyone.
Welcome to Afrique Today. My name is Alain Pierre. You're watching Afrique Today, and we are live now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and our full platform www.afriquetoday.com. We have a special discussion today. I will give the word to Dr. Manka. She's live with me now. Hello, Dr. Manka.
Hi everyone. Good evening and welcome to this first in a series of discussions that is brought to you by Immigrant Community Services, the Office of Honorable William Jawanda, City Council Member at Large for Montgomery County, and Afriquetoday. Thank you so much, Afriquetoday, for having us on today. We're really going to be bringing you some information about resources and how to manage with the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Mankan Kimbeng again, and I am honored to be the host and moderator for this session. I want to warmly welcome you, our viewers, and welcome you, Council Member Jawando, and our subject matter expert, Dr. Dalton, today to this session. And so,
nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem. We're glad to have you all on board and on today. So maybe we can begin with you all maybe just giving opening remarks to our viewers today. So maybe we can start with you, Council Member Jawando, to say something to our viewers. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you this evening, and thank you for having me. It's an important time, obviously an important discussion as we try to deal with this global pandemic. I'm a council member at large here in Montgomery County. I represent all 1.1 million people. We're the largest jurisdiction in Maryland, and a third of our residents are foreign-born, many from the continent of Africa, so my dad included. And so honored to serve, and there's a lot going on. So I think you want me to not go into my remarks, just say, did you just want me to introduce myself now?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll pause there. Yeah, so it's good to be with you.
Thank you for being on board here. Dr. Dalton, want to say hello to our viewers?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Jonathan Dalton. I'm actually one of the constituents of Mr. Jawanda. And I specialize in working with people who have anxiety and mood disorders. And this is a time when there's obviously a lot of that going on. So that's my very brief introduction.
Thank you both for saying hello to our viewers, and I definitely will be having more directed questions to you all. But to our new viewers, we really wanted to let you know a little bit about Immigrant Community Services. So Immigrant Community Services is an organization that serves the African immigrant community in the Washington, D.C. metro area. It was created in 2012 in response to the rising African immigrant population in the area. And really, Immigrant Community Services works to support families and communities, providing social, family, employment, education, and cultural programs to the African immigrants in the area, really just helping the community to thrive in our new land. And so our discussion today is really the first, and it falls of several conversations and falls under our community health programs. And today we're going to start with maybe the local view by talking to Councilmember Jawanda about what's happening locally. And then after that, we'll get into talking to Dr. Dalton more about how we can cope with this thing that is happening to us all over the world and is affecting us all. So after we talk with Dr. Dalton, we're going to have some time for questions. So please feel free to send in your questions on Facebook, Immigrant Community Services website, Twitter, and on whatever portal you're actually watching right now. We'll be able to answer some questions live. So I'm going to start with Councilmember Jawanda. I think we just saw recently that Montgomery County released statistics for the cases by zip code in the area. So that's really it's good information to have. But I guess, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about what is happening locally and what are some of the issues that we need to be paying attention to that are coming from your office or the government right now?
Sure. And thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing that up. Obviously, we're focused on making sure that we do everything we can at the county level to keep people safe. That's everything from this week issuing we have the county health officer issued a face covering order and protective order for retail and grocery workers. That's very important that we keep those folks safe and we keep the residents that they're interacting with safe. We've also recently passed a $36 million relief package, which included a number of things. First, about $20 million in relief in the form of grants, not loans, grants for small businesses and nonprofits. So they're both eligible. That program actually, which is called the Public Health Emergency Grant Program, opens for applications tomorrow. So this is actually a good time to be talking to you. And that's any nonprofit or small business that's less than 100 employees. So from 1 to 100, you can apply. You just have to demonstrate your losses, which many people unfortunately have right now as they've been forced to shut down. And if you go to Montgomery County MD.gov, on the banner there's going to be a link to click for this program, the PHEG, the Public Health Emergency Grant Program. It shows you what you need to apply, and you can apply starting online tomorrow. That's part of the 36 million. We also allocated $10 million to our hospitals to help prepare for surge capacity when we see the peak here in Montgomery County, which we think will be in the next several weeks. We also, in this kind of talk, leans into what we're talking about tonight, the mental health piece. We've also put $5 million in direct cash assistance to residents that whom otherwise might not be eligible for the federal money. There's certain populations, if you're undocumented, for example, that you're not eligible for that money. And we know that we have a population here that is going to need assistance as well. And then we also allocated $1 million to our Health and Human Services department, who are working with many nonprofits, some of which are dealing with mental health, some are dealing with homelessness, some are dealing with food insecurity, all those kind of vulnerable population safety net groups that they need to expand those services, rental assistance, payments. And so that's a package that we put out there, in addition to funding a food bank directly, Manna Food Bank here, Manna Food Center in the county. We've about $250,000 to them, and to hotel rooms for about $250,000 for hotel rooms for doctors and nurses and medical staff, so that they don't have to go home. They can be near the hospital and get some rest, which obviously rest is connected to mental health. I'm sure the doctor will talk about that. So I mentioned those things as resources. I'm also very focused on the disparity issue. We wrote a letter to the governor last week, and I had been in contact with him prior to that as well, to say we need to know what the data is here in Maryland. We know that communities of color, particularly African American, Latino communities, and low-income populations are contracting and dying at much higher rates across the country. We needed to know what the numbers were here. I live actually in one of the top 2 zip codes in the state, 20904, which is the eastern part of the county, where many White Oak, many African immigrants, many Black residents, but we also see high zip codes in Wheaton, where our Latino residents are, and other places. And so I've been working with our health officer and our council to see if we can appropriate some specific money to support targeted messaging and outreach and communications and language access programs for those communities, as well as pop-up testing in those communities. And that's a huge issue because we have a testing shortage everywhere, but particularly in communities of color and immigrant communities where people are unsure of how to even access a test. Getting over this hurdle of having to call a primary care doctor. Well, what if you don't have a primary care doctor? Where do you go then? And urgent cares, many of them are closed. We're told not to go to the hospitals. It becomes confusing very quickly. And so we're going to be working on all those things to try to provide some direct resources. Also, I think my staff will provide or has provided to you. We created a resource list in every area, food insecurity, cash payments, rental help, that has links. So we'll provide that to you, as well as our county mental health resources, hotlines, and all those links, because we know that that's a serious problem as well. And in the physical, though we're worried about the physical danger, we know that the mental health and an anxiety. I mean, even I have 4 kids under 9. Even if you're in a normal situation with 2 jobs and a stable situation, no one's sick, there's anxiety in our household. And so I can only imagine if you don't know where your payments are coming from, and you don't know how you're going to get by. And the last thing I'll mention is today I introduced, actually, you're catching a lot of news today with the programs, the public health emergency grants departing tomorrow. And my bill I introduced today, the COVID-19 Renter Relief Act, which will freeze rents at their current rate during the crisis. We've seen, unfortunately, while most of our landlords have been doing the right thing and trying to work with tenants, and obviously the landlords are struggling to pay some of their bills and their workers as well too, our renters are even more vulnerable. And in some cases, you've seen some landlords taking advantage and proposing increases, in some cases significant increases. So this bill will freeze those increases until 30 days after the state of emergency ends, because we know we're going to have a lot of people trying to catch up for a long time as we get over the hump here and restart our economy and hopefully keep people safe. So those are some of the things I'm working on. We also have a language translation unit we've set up, trying to translate things in different languages. Fatmata Berry, who works in my office, who's from Sierra Leone, is a key player in that unit, in trying to help make sure that we get information out to everybody in different languages and different communities. That's why I really am honored to be on tonight with you all, because we need to make sure that everyone has access to the information. So I'll pause there, but I appreciate it.
Oh, geez. Thank you so much for all the information. And to our viewers, we're definitely going to put all of this information up on the website, the grant program, the information about the stipends, and even the new bill that is coming for renters. We'll make all of this information available on the website so that you can access it when you need to. And as obviously, contact us if you have any questions, and contact the council member's office if you have any questions about any of the things that he's provided for you. But
yeah, could I mention one other thing I forgot to mention?
Yes.
Sorry, is that the federal government If you haven't applied for under the CARES Act, there's the PPP program that can, if you have a small business through the SBA, you can apply there. It's slow, but keep up and keep on it. The state has some programs as well. Those are all those links are on the resource guide that I have, but you want to apply at every level. And if you're unemployed, you want to apply for unemployment insurance as well. So because they passed a $600 cash payment on top of whatever your normal payment is on your unemployment insurance. So in some cases, some people might be able to actually get up to, 55,000 a year based on, it won't be for a year, but that type of salary, if you apply for both. And we know that it's an expensive place to live. You want to make sure you're applying for all those things. So that information is on the resource guide. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll definitely make that available to you, our viewers. Thank you so much, Councilmember Jawanda, for all you do. We really appreciate it. And thank you for coming and talking to us. And thank you again, Afriquetoday, for hosting us and letting us talk and learn how to cope with this pandemic that is really affecting us all. So we're going to turn to talking to Dr. Dalton now, and we have some questions for you, Dr. Dalton. But a little bit about Dr. Dalton. So he's a licensed psychologist who founded a Center for Anxiety and Behavioral Change with offices in Rockville and McLean, Virginia. He received his doctorate degree in clinical psychology from Fordham University with a specialization in child and family psychology. And then he later completed postdoctoral training focusing on anxiety disorders at the University of Maryland. So, Dr. Dalton, we know that at this point in time, there's a lot of anxiety that's happening. There's a lot of stress. As a council member, talked about this, it's happening to everybody. But what I think a lot of us are confused or unsure about is it normal? And if it's normal, when do we worry? When does it become abnormal? And when do we need to start worrying about it?
Great. Well, thank you so much for Afriquetoday, for giving me the platform to talk about this. This is something that I care deeply about, and I know that we're all suffering in some very significant ways. Evolution wants us to feel anxiety. It orients us to threats. It helps us to problem solve. And so having anxiety is not a disorder. Having anxiety means that you're alive. And so it's really important that we understand the difference between what is a problematic anxiety or a mood disorder, and what is a natural reaction to really novel situations that we're finding ourselves in. I think that we're going to be looking a lot at really two waves of mental health concerns here. There's the crisis that we're in right now, where people are worried about their health or loved ones' health, or how to pay their bills when they're unemployed. There's tremendous stress, which is more of a response to external demands that we can't meet. And then I think that as this crisis period passes, and as Councilmember Jawanda was saying, that we think in the next few weeks in Montgomery County, we're going to reach our peak, then we're going to have to start to reintroduce ourselves back into society with a lot of uncertainty in situations we've never been in before. And so I think the second wave is going to come with the anxiety as we're looking to reintegrate back into society, as kids are learning how to go back into a school environment. I think there'll be a lot of really tremendous levels of distress people are experiencing during that time as well.
Great. So there's anxiety that we're facing now that is kind of here, but there's also going to be some anxiety towards the ending as we try to go back into our normal lives.
I think it's going to come in those two waves. One is more of a stress response, which is very normal. Again, stress and anxiety is designed to orient us to be aware of threats in our environment, to problem solve. Worry is very functional if it's tied to problem solving. It's only when the worry becomes divorced from the problem solving itself that it really becomes problematic and requires a little bit more of an intervention for some people.
And so I'm thinking that when it becomes problematic, that's when we start getting into the lane of mental health issues and having some sort of diagnosis. So what are some mental health issues that we should be thinking about as a community and trying to know more about, so that we can be able to say, oh, this is something that is disturbing me and maybe I should start seeking help?
So as the council member was saying before, when we're seeing disturbances in sleep, if there's changes in eating habits, if people are not able to concentrate or focus, those are all normal reactions. But you know what? So is it normal to go into shock if you've been in a car accident. It doesn't mean you don't need treatment for it. And so I think it's really important that as we're having this discussion, that we're able to look at, well, when does anxiety become something that would benefit from services? And I think that we're looking for kind of functional impairment when someone is not able to do the things that they'd want to do. If anxiety is helping you, if it's giving you the ability to focus on certain things in your environment that are really important to focus on, like getting a face covering, or how to apply for unemployment insurance, or how to access county services, those are all really positive things that the anxiety can orient us to do. But for a lot of people, the anxiety starts to move beyond that optimal range of functioning. You know, we know that people actually perform at their highest level under moderate levels of stress and anxiety. But when it gets to be a place where it's starting to impair our functioning, when it's stopping us from being able to do our work, when it's keeping us from taking good care of ourselves, when it's interfering with our ability to sleep and to have good interpersonal relationships, those are really indications that this is moving into a different zone where it's no longer helpful and is probably causing some hurt in their lives, some suffering. And there are some really good skills people can learn to better manage their distress related to those things.
Okay. And so, other than anxiety, are there other things that could be exacerbated or worsened during this crisis, or are there other kind of mental health things that we should be looking out for as a community to pay attention for?
I think every mental health disorder, if someone has a pre-existing disorder, I think most people are finding that it's getting worsened by the current situation. Mm-hmm. So depression, for instance, I learn a lot from the patients I work with. And many, many years ago, I had a 12-year-old boy who had depression, and he told me what it was like for him. And he said, wow, depression makes my life feel like a stick of chewing gum that lost its flavor. And I think that really captures the experience of depression, because the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's vitality, it's being fully alive. And right now we're so limited in what we can do, in the ways that we can express ourselves, and the activities we can engage in, that this quarantine is really a petri dish for depression to grow on as well. We know tragically that the vitamin C against anxiety and depression is access to social support. And yet this cruel virus is interfering with our ability to get the very things that are going to be most helpful for us, most healing for us during this time. I think that people that have anger-based disorders, where they're having difficulty with regulating their mood with regard to anger, irritability is going to be through the roof as people are constantly in this small environment, often in very small spaces, without an ability to leave and to do the things that they want to do. I think substance abuse disorders are going to be one of the most vulnerable disorders that we're going to look for, as people are consuming things or taking shortcuts to regulate their mood, whether it's by drugs or alcohol, or by other kinds of things that we are consuming at unhealthy levels, like the news media, getting notifications on our phone too often. I think that people, when they're trying to consume unhealthy things, including food at this point, I think so things like eating disorders are going to be at risk during this time period. Sleep disorders are at risk during this time period because we're not able to stay in our usual schedules, which we know are so important for people who have sleep disturbances. So I could go through the whole list. People that have PTSD and have been through trauma, as I know way too many immigrants have had, whether it was before they came here or during their journey here or since they've arrived here. And I think that people, their trauma responses are going to be more exacerbated by the threat cues in their environment. Even people that have been tragically assaulted, seeing everyone wearing masks, I think for some people who have trauma responses, that could be a trigger for them, and some, depending on the nature of their trauma. So I really think that so many mental health conditions are really vulnerable right now for being exacerbated in the current situation.
Thank you. Yes, the other thing the council member had brought up too was the income piece, and kind of not being able to work. That is causing a lot of financial stress as well for the community. I guess the next question will be, thinking about all of these and the mental health conditions, what are some things that you suggest that we do to kind of cope and try to manage these things that we're seeing happening in our community? Yeah.
So job loss is going to hit us in three different ways. Okay, it's going to hit us financially, of course, and there's going to be very significant challenges with regard to just daily living, being able to for some families to put food on the table literally, or to stay in their home. People are facing eviction. Hopefully that's not happening during the pandemic, but there's a lot of financial stress that we're all too aware of. There's also the lack of identity. People often identify with what it is they're doing for a living, with the people they work with. It's part of their sense of self. And when they're laid off or they can't access that, that's going to be a crisis of identity for a lot of people. They're not going to quite know who they are if they can't say, well, this is what I do for a living. And the third way it's going to hit us is it's going to take away our structure, our routine. And so the natures of our routines are such that we have a regular time to wake, we're expected to go somewhere, do the same thing, and we know that humans just do so much better under routines, under things that are predictable. And so right now, when someone loses their job, they're being hit by all three of those different things all at the same time. And in addition to the fear of becoming sick or loved ones becoming sick. And the two pillars of anxiety are uncertainty and lack of control. And right now, we are intermingling both of those in a level that we've never seen, and we're seeing at a global level right now. And obviously different communities are getting at different time points, but everyone is going to be dealing with this quickly with differential levels of resources available to them. So when we ask what do we do about this, well, we do what we can. There's many things that we can't control, but there are some things that we can control. And so we look for is the research on resilience. Resilience is really about adapting well in the face of trauma, in the face of stress, in the face of adversity. And when we look at, well, what do people that have good levels of resilience, what do they do? Well, the first thing is to keep in mind that resilience is a skill. It's not an attribute like eye color or height. And so like a muscle, it can get stronger with practice and rehearsal. And so we don't want to think of a person as a resilient person or a non-resilient person. We want to see how far along are their skills in building resiliency. And so there's a few things that we can talk to about resilience in the face of this major stressor in everyone's life. And so I can break them down to some different ways. That I'll begin by saying the 3 C's. So the first C is going to be connection. As I mentioned before, that vitamin C against depression and anxiety is social connectedness. It's feeling supported by people who care about us. Now, we've never had more obstacles placed in front of us in our ability to connect with people, but we've never had more innovation available to us to make this happen. As I'm sitting in my home talking to people who are in different locations right now on my laptop. So being able to connect in whatever way that we can. Now, connection can mean trying to reach out to loved ones or friends and talking with them, whether it's over a Zoom call or over a phone line or through text. That's really important. But I think connection also can be more at a global level, more of a meta level, in the sense that we know that humans throughout our history, we've faced plagues and pandemics before. And so we can also connect with those who came before us in a way that we couldn't before. We can understand other people's experiences in a different way now that we're sharing that our own experience of a global pandemic. We can, I think, relate to historical forces in a way, ancestors in a way that can be very powerful for us and very healing for us. The second C is going to be continuity. When someone loses a job, or just when they're dealing with a situation and they have a job but they can't go to their job and they're maybe on furlough right now, and so they're going to have a job waiting for them but they can't access it right now, is trying to keep as much continuity as we can. That means establishing a routine. It means trying to wake at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, eating at a certain time, trying to keep a schedule that most resembles the life that we had before and the life that we will eventually go back to. We don't know when, but we do know that pandemics are not permanent. And so we want to try and establish as much of a routine, as much continuity on a day-by-day basis. That's going to be helpful for us. And the third C is creativity. Creativity in the sense of, well, how do we overcome these obstacles? What do we do in our daily life so that we can connect with people that are hard to connect to? It takes a lot of creativity. But the other thing that we know is that during periods of stress, humans throughout history have felt a very strong urge to express ourselves. And so I think an expressive outlet of creativity, whether it's through music, through art, through poetry, creative writing, journaling right now is, I think, really helpful for many, many people as they're going through historic times right now. So being able to express ourselves through creative outlets, through artistic outlets, I think is very, very important for us. Let me pause there. I know I said a lot there, but I think building resilience through those 3 C's, and I have more I can say about that too, but let me pause there for a minute.
So 3 C's. Connecting with people, connecting with our past, continuity, trying to maintain our routines, and then creativity, either in doing things in a creative way or actually having creative outlets. That's very good to know. Definitely, that's information that we need to take as a community and start practicing some of those things to help us cope with this pandemic. I guess the other question I would ask in relation to that would be, some people are already struggling now, and some people might be coming down the pike with some of those worries and some of those conditions or difficulties. What are some things we can do? I know I'm a nurse, and a lot of our work is based on prevention. Prevent exercise is good for you. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, and so some of those things. Are there ways in which we can, beginning now, especially for those who might not be suffering yet, but start working to do things to prevent kind of some mental health conditions developing down the line?
Yes, that's a great question. Glad you asked that question. Prevention is everything. And I work a lot with kids, and I often feel like I'm this assembly line worker who's fixing the cars coming off the assembly line who aren't working appropriately. And prevention, I think, is such an important part of this. When it comes to that, there's a few things that we can do. And I'll talk about kids as well, because kids are a really important part of this conversation because their lives have been uprooted. They don't have the context that we have to better understand what's going on around them. But I think the first thing, just like you mentioned about going to see doctors, wellness, taking care of yourself before you get sick is more important than what you do when you're sick. And so I think that wellness comes in a lot of different forms. Wellness can be certainly making sure that we have good nutrition, that we're exercising in an appropriate way. We're not designed as a species to sit all day long. And yet right now, more than ever before, I think that we are faced with this idea that most of our life is right now spent sitting. And so getting movement, whether it's watching an online exercise class, going for a walk on a beautiful day like today, riding a bike, anything that we can do to get our bodies in motion. There's good research that shows that exercise is as effective as medication for moderate levels of depression. And so if we're looking at ways to prevent the development of these conditions, I think the first thing is to take care of ourselves by taking care of our bodies. Nutrition, sleep, exercise. I think part of it too is this idea of self-compassion. I think that so many people right now are feeling like, okay, I need to come out of this better than I went into it. I want to go into this with the best mindset. I'm going to be reinventing myself. And I think this will lead to a re-examination of values, and that's a good thing. We know that growth and comfort are often incompatible. And so during this period of trial and stress, we're going to be reevaluating things. I'm a firm believer, partly because of what I do for a living and I see this happen on a daily basis, but I believe that struggle is pregnant with meaning and purpose. And I think we're going to come at it from that vantage point as well. We're going to learn things because of that. But I don't want people to become perfectionistic. I think sometimes we swim toward shore and sometimes we tread water. And there's good times to do both. You don't always have to be swimming at your greatest effort. Sometimes treading water is exactly the right thing to do. And giving ourselves permission right now to tread water and be proud that we're not going under is a really important skill set in terms of self-compassion and self-care. I think that that part of this is going to be limiting our access to stressful media. I think that, immediately when this hit, I turned off all of my notifications on my phone for every news site. I think that social media distancing is an important thing to do right now, because a lot of what we're seeing is the things that get the most clicks, the most extreme things. and it's not always representative of what's actually happening in the community. And so limiting our time on news sites to maybe once or twice a day just to get updates if we need them, like Mr. Jawando just did with some resources that are available, that's information that we can use. But seeing people just talking in circles around each other is not going to help us to learn more information. I think that adapting our thinking skills, optimism, the science tells us optimism is also a skill and a habit that can be taught and can be learned. And so right now it's very easy to look at these dark times and think the sun will never rise. But having an optimistic view about, well, what's it going to be like when we're able to emerge from this? Being able to have a future orientation, to be able to realize that the scariest thoughts that we have right now are just the scariest thoughts that we're having right now. We never want to confuse thoughts with evidence. What I'm finding is that people who have been treated for anxiety disorders are actually doing quite well right now by and large, because they've learned to tolerate uncertainty. They've learned how to differentiate thoughts from evidence. They've learned the importance of self-care, of acceptance of the present moment. Acceptance doesn't mean that we're endorsing what's happening right now and that we're happy about it. It just means that we're not arguing with reality, that we're accepting that this is the place that we're in right now, and we're accepting that this is the place that we will not remain in. And so we can both at the same time accept the present moment and plan for a positive future. I think those are really important. Another thing that we can do, and the science again is very clear on this, is that finding meaning within struggle, as I mentioned before, is really important. And so volunteering, even from home, even if it is something small, calling people that are maybe isolated, checking in on neighbors, making a mask from home for healthcare workers, for kids writing on chalk near the hospital saying, thank you for what you're doing, or having kids write a note to put on their door, their front door, saying, thank you to delivery people who are delivering their food and goods. Doing something so we're having some agency over what's happening, I think is very protective as well.
Thank you. So basically, in all that we're doing, we really need to have an attitude of this too shall pass. This is temporary. It's going to come to an end. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but especially when it comes to kids, what are some of the things that we need to do as parents and as adults who are involved in these kids' lives to begin to help them care for their own well-being? Because like you rightly mentioned, some kids have no context for this and really don't even understand kind of a bigger picture of happening. Yeah.
Great question. So obviously it changes based on the ages of the kids. So a teenager is very different from a 6-year-old developmentally and needs to be addressed in a different way. I think I have 3 of my own kids who are in those age ranges from 10 to almost 15, and it's challenging because we want to keep the adult worry separate from kid worries. And we don't want the kids to know too much, so we're not having kids watch the news, we're not turning on CNN or one of the news sites so they can hear the latest death tolls that are coming up. We teach them that they will be taken care of and that here are reasonable precautions that you can take. So if it's a very little one, just saying there's germs outside, and so we have to make sure that we don't go on the slides or the swings right now. For the older kids, the teenagers, we have to acknowledge that they're grieving right now. They're grieving what they expected to have happen. The seniors in high school, I feel especially bad for, who are missing the ordinary trappings of transition, who are not able to be with their loved ones at school, to say goodbye to teachers that they've spent, this is under the assumption they're not going to go back to school this year, which I think is most likely. And so acknowledging that grief is a process of this, not just a grief if someone passes, but and that's complicated right now in a number of different ways, but grieving the lost experiences that they're not having during this time, the structure, the predictability, the sports teams that they're not able to play on. There's so many losses happening right now, and acknowledging that those are real losses, I think, is really important. But one of the things that I help parents do a lot is to cope out loud. Kids learn by observing how their parents do things. And so if parents are in a situation where there's some stress, again, we don't want to overload them with inappropriate levels of information, but saying things like, wow, I was so stressed today when I thought about these things. And then I was able to disconnect, turn my device off, and just sit with myself and to think about what are some positive ways that I can be thinking about this situation right now. Well, right now I'm healthy. We have a roof over our head. We have food to eat right now, which is a lot more than many people have. And that I realized that what's happening right now is I'm having a lot of scary thoughts about what might happen in the future. And then I reminded myself that those are really scary thoughts, and that those thoughts don't mean they're going to happen. They just mean that right now I'm having those scary thoughts. So the more parents can cope out loud in front of their kids, the more the kids will learn by observing, oh, yeah, feelings are mentionable. This is from Mr. Rogers. They're mentionable, but they're also manageable. And if we can mention them, if we can call the emotions by name, then we lower their intensity. There's good science that tells us that as well. So teaching kids to be able to use what we call I feel sentences. I feel scared. I feel frustrated. I feel bored. I feel, I don't know what I feel. And then you can say, okay, well, here are some ways that a lot of kids are feeling right now. Do these sound like this? The younger the kid, the less they have words to express how they feel. Many of the kids are going to express this with their body. They're going to have stomach aches and headaches. They're going to have, just different stress responses in their body, aches and pains, different things like that. And so being aware of that. As I mentioned, the 3 C's, those matter even more for the kids. The structure that's most lacking right now is most difficult for the kids. Now, I have great compassion for the parents, because I'm one of them, who's trying to teach kids through distance learning, who's trying to do their job and parent their kids all at the same time. And so we have to acknowledge the best any person can do is one thing at a time. And none of us can be 3 people at once. But the more that we can help kids with structure and predictability, go for a walk at the same time every day, get up at the same time every day, have board games at 7 o'clock in the evening, have family movie nights on the weekend. The more that we can have daily routine and predictability, the more the kids will be resilient against what's going on right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dalton. So basically, really having a tailored approach where you treat the kids based on their age, and then paying attention to them to make sure that you're seeing even the onset things that are happening to them, and really modeling good ways of coping in front of them so they can begin learning how to cope.
Yeah, and
so
even
thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you finish your...
So I was going to say, just asking them what questions they have, I think is really helpful, because we don't want to assume that they're thinking about this in the same way that adults are. Because many of the kids that I'm working with are not. Even my very anxious kids, they're actually not thinking about the virus very much at all, because they're focused on their video game or something along those lines. So we want to ask them, what questions do you have about the situation we're in right now? So that they're able to know that what they're saying is important. But one of the most important things a parent can do is to help a kid feel heard, listened to, and understood. And so giving them the platform to ask questions, or make comments, or just to have a discussion about what they're feeling. And again, making the emotional words mentionable makes them manageable for kids. If you have a kid who is having more behavioral problems right now, well, that's most kids right now, because they're not having their usual routine. There's extra stress, there's uncertainty, there's novelty with the learning process, and some people don't even have access to being online to be able to even allow their kids to do the online learning right now. Food insecurity, people having to travel to get lunch now and at breakfast in a way they didn't before. There's a lot of things that are going on that the kids might not even understand themselves are causing a lot of these issues that present in a behavioral way, but their origin is emotional.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dalton, and I am learning so much, but we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with Dr. Dalton. Back to you, Alan, in the studios.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for watching Afrique Today. This is Afrique Today. We will take a little bit a small break, and when we will come back after the break, I remember you can watch Afrique Today on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and our website www.afriquetoday.com. You can also download Afrique Today app, and you will be able to watch this show live. We'll take a break. We'll be right back after the break. Thank you. Thank you to be with us. We will go back to Dr. Manka. She's here with me. She's in Maryland right now. And Dr. Manka, I'll go back to you can speak now.
Welcome back to the session on coping with COVID-19 pandemic, brought to you by the Immigrant Community Services and the Office of Councilmember William Jawanda. And we're back live again with Dr. Dalton talking about how to cope with this pandemic. So Dr. Watson, we're talking about how to help our kids cope. And so our next question is going to be a little bit heavy one.
Yeah.
So it's people are losing lives, and almost everyone knows somebody that has passed or knows somebody who knows somebody that has passed. How do we as a community begin to mourn, or how do we cope with these losses that unfortunately might be coming down the pike even more?
Yeah, grief is very complicated right now because every major culture and religious tradition has rituals and routines that survive something as important as a loved one passing. We gather together, we support each other, we hold hands, we light candles, we go through things that are very meaningful and tie us to our history and help us to support us during this time. And grief during this time is compounded by a few different things. Number one is the physical space. I know people who have lost people as well in the last week, and they're having to postpone memorial services indefinitely during this time. So people are grieving not only the loss of their loved one, but they're grieving that they can't mourn them in the way that they had planned. And I think that is an absolutely terrible circumstance for people to try and cope with, because there's no standard to look back on and to say, oh, well, this is how you do it in this situation. I think part of it also is that often when we lose someone, the community really looks to support us in particular, because we're going through not a unique experience, but we're going through it at a time that may be more unique to us. And right now, there's a lot of people are having an experience of almost having their private mourning process hijacked by the virus, in the sense that now they are just one of many people going through this. So they're losing some of that uniqueness during this time. And I know that people after 9/11 went through similar things, and certainly people after the tsunami and after other kind of large-scale disasters, there's this collective grief which leads to people not being able to grieve individually in the same way. So these are times where the grief process is more complicated than it even ordinarily is. And grief is the most painful experience that a person can go through. It follows its own rhythm. There's not a certain right way to grieve, and there certainly isn't a wrong way to grieve. And so as people are faced with this process, we fall back on, again, continuity, which is what can we borrow from the past that's part of our culture, our customs, our rituals and routines that we can bring to bear here, whether it's an online memorial service or whether it is a private mass and burial or whatever the culture is bringing to bear during that time. So we try and draw as much as we can. But also, I think part of this is to move towards the emotions that we have, to accept them. The psychological research is showing more and more there's this central concept that underlies so much of our suffering. And so that concept, the term we use for it, is psychological flexibility. And what that really means is it means that we don't try and avoid our emotional experiences, that we lean into them, that we allow them to be there. That doesn't mean that we be overwhelmed by them or that we indulge them, but it also means that we don't dismiss those emotions either, that we see them as a source of wisdom for us, that we can be strong enough to be in grief and to be anxious and to be scared and to be sad and that we don't need to avoid those experiences. We don't need to judge them in a negative way any more than we would look at a cloud and say it's misshapen, or look at a tree and say it should be a bush. We have a non-judgmental stance that allows us to fully experience the emotions and to know that grief is not an emotion to avoid, but it's a process to move through. And it's complicated in very significant ways right now, mostly, I think, because of the prevention of ritual associated with death right now, and the loss of communal support, of people hugging and holding each other during a period of grief and tragedy. And so what we'll do during this time is the only thing we can do, which is the best that we can do, which is to know that the grief is normal. It's the price of love, right, as we say, to allow yourself to engage in the grief process and to be kind to yourself during it, to allow yourself to know that the grief will be more complicated because of what's going on, but that we will also make it through this process. We will not be the same we were before, but we get, again, growth and comfort are incompatible things. That allowing ourselves to move through this process will give us meaning, will change us, but that's not something that we want to look at as a negative thing. That going through these periods of trial are going to be things that we look back on as foundational experiences that taught us things that we couldn't have learned any other way than by going through these very, very challenging experiences. And there is a concept that's very important to mention here, which is the idea of post-traumatic growth. That post-traumatic growth it's not dismissive of the trauma. It means that we were able to move through it to find meaning and purpose within it and to become a different yet more textured version of ourselves for having gone through that experience. And so, if you're familiar with some of the writings that came out of the Holocaust, when people were surrounded by death on a daily basis, what they found, the people that did the most did the best during this period in terms of their emotional growth, in terms of their just survival, were the ones who found purpose and meaning within their suffering. And so one of the most persistent questions that we all face, I'm a firm believer in this, is what is life trying to teach me right now? Now, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know it's the right question to ask, because it's going to frame the discussion in the terms of how can I learn from this experience? What is life trying to teach me in this moment in time that we're in? Even if it's a moment that's full of grief and tragedy and loss, there will still be meaning and purpose that's attached to it. And so looking for that meaning and purpose during the period of great struggle and grief, I think will help us to move through that process and not avoid that process.
Grief is the price of love. It's very nice, and it's going to be difficult, but finding meaning through it, even through the difficulty, can help us as we go through this right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Watson.
Thank you.
My next question for you is another heavy one. So I read recently that the number of calls to crisis hotlines have been increasing, and unfortunately, it's actually minors that have been calling in. So we know that there's abuse happening, unfortunately, in our community.
Yes.
And in times of this kinds of crisis, you know, it might get worse. And in some cases, people are living in the same homes with abusive situations. And so if you can talk a little bit more about dealing with it from the point of view of children and kids or minors, and then maybe from the point of view as us who are adults, and how we can cope with this and the pandemic as well.
Yeah, those are the kids that I'm most worried about right now, are the kids who have school as their respite from being at home. And there's many kids who experience school in that way, where there are stable, reliable adult figures in their life in that environment. And when they're living with someone who is abusive to them, and that can happen in a lot of different ways, that's of great concern to me. And so I think that, yes, there have been multiple 100% increases in hotline calls from people. I know there's going to be an increase in suicides, as there often is, even just financial stress during this time period. And so I think this is where, depending on the kids and their age, they are not going to be able to access those resources. And so if there is a parent who is having a substance abuse disorder and the other parent is not quite sure what to do, and they're worried about the impact of that substance abuse, the behavior that comes with it on those kids, reach out, please. This is the time to do it. These kids do not have a safe place to go to right now other than the home. So we have no choice but to make the home a safe place for them. And that means that if we need to call Child Protection Services, that's what we do. If you have a neighbor you're concerned about and you're noticing that this level of stress has made you much more concerned about the well-being of the kids, take decisive action to give those kids the support and the resources that they cannot access themselves. That is very important. If you yourself are finding that your irritability is going through the roof, please take a time out, go for a walk, take a space away from the kids. We know how hard parenthood can be under the best of circumstances, with the most resources. And right now we're facing a situation where parenthood has literally never been more challenging than it is right now. And so have the self-compassion, the awareness, the insight to look for what I call the yellow lights going off for yourself before the red light happens. Once the red light happens, if you're at full speed, you're going to crash. You want to know your own yellow lights. When are you starting to feel that you are at your breaking point where you're afraid something's going to happen, in that circumstance? If there are any kids watching who are concerned about their peers, tell your parents. Let them know that you're really worried about someone that has confided in you about what happens in the home environment. This is a time for people to gather together and protect the most vulnerable among us, and those are almost always the children who are in our environment. If you are concerned about a younger sibling, maybe you're watching this and you're older, and you have a sibling who's at home and you think there might be abuse going on, find a way to talk to the kids, find a way to get them support, find a way for them to access services if that's something that's needed. This is not a time that we say, oh, what happens behind closed doors is their business. It's all of our business, because we're all behind closed doors right now. All of us are. And we really need to take care of the kids by any means that we possibly can, to make sure, and not just kids, other people are in abusive relationships that are adults. I'm very worried about battered women during this time period, where they can't literally leave their house sometimes for a long time. And no one's going to miss them if they don't show up somewhere in many situations right now, because maybe they've been laid off and they're not working right now. And so they've lost all of that structure too. So it takes a village, it takes a community. This is a very, very important time to put those words into practice and check in on each other and check in on the kids, especially the ones who can't take care of themselves.
Yeah. We are in this together, and we have to take care of each other and our community.
Yeah, we're all behind closed doors now.
Yeah. So, many of us are immigrants, and so we have family members back home on the continent or in the Caribbean, so different parts of the world. I mean, there are also people in Montgomery County or Maryland who have family in different parts of the world. What are some suggestions on how we can begin to help, especially for us as immigrants and people who have family members in places where healthcare and resources are very limited? How are some ways in which we can begin to cope and think through helping our family members back there to begin thinking about their mental health and coping as this pandemic is kind of going towards Africa and other smaller countries now?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a very valid, as we know, and real concern. And we want to acknowledge the limits of what we can do. We can't stop the pandemic. We can't restart the economy on our own. We can't take care of loved ones who live on a different continent right now in the way that I know we would all love to. And that's a challenging situation to be in. So part of this is going to be looking at, well, what can I do? If I can't do those things, what is it that I can do? Anxiety and depression love it when we think in absolutes. I can't do anything, or I must do everything. And so I always ask the question, well, if you can't do that, what can you do? And so what I think we can do in this situation is to communicate. We are now their Sherpas, right? We've been through this before they've been through it. We have that wisdom of experience that they don't have. And so communicating the seriousness of this, I know it's hard to see this as something that's really serious if you aren't seeing it affect your community. It becomes much more distant over the horizon. But communicating to loved ones, these are the things that you want to be prepared for. And so that you, again, are kind of looking at that reservoir of resilience by trying to take proactive, decisive action, by doing something that gives meaning to this suffering that we're going through. And so communicating that, look, we are the canary in the coal mines right now. We are the ones who are going through this. Please take what we're saying right now seriously. Communicate the needs, being as creative as we can. I know that many of these countries in Africa do not have nearly the resources. You can count on one hand sometimes the number of working ventilators in the whole countries that are in Africa. And that's a reality. It's a stark reality, and it's accurate. And so because of that, well, what can we do? How can we get resources there? How can we get knowledge there? How do we get skills there? How do we help people using whatever skills that we ourselves know, whether it is broadcasting over there, whether it is reaching out to people and communicating our knowledge base to them, whatever we ourselves have, whatever unique skills and knowledge, abilities that we have, bringing those to bear for people over there will paradoxically help us to cope over here, because it means that we're doing something. Even if we can't do everything we want to do, we have the knowledge that we're doing something that's impactful, that we're making a difference for the people that we love, even if we can't take care of them in the way that we would, of course, most want to do.
Yeah, definitely communicating with our family members and letting them know how to care for themselves. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned in passing during our conversation, which was the idea about the news. There's so much information coming at us from numerous sources. Sometimes it's in the same minute, it's contradictory.
Yeah.
So what are some suggestions that you can give us and our viewers to kind of think through what we let in and kind of how to protect ourselves from all of this information that is coming our way and could be some of what is actually causing the anxiety and stress that we're feeling?
It's a great question. I think that part of what we do is that we choose a reliable source for our media consumption, and that we go to that source, whether it's an established newspaper, something along those lines, where there's an editorial process that goes into what's being communicated. When on social media, as I mentioned before, people are posting the things that are most attention getting. And those are often the most extreme examples. The worst fears come true, what may happen down the road. And our brains are not evolved to be able to necessarily say, oh, well, okay, that may not be the best example of what may happen, because it's so easy for us to confuse fear and probability of occurrence, right? And so picking a neutral, reliable source and going to that and avoiding the sites that are clickbaiting us with the big headlines, with, you know, the rapid communication and discussions on cable news where you're not going to learn much if you spend 3 hours watching CNN or Fox News. You're just not. And so checking in on factual information from sources that you trust that are based in science. That's the most important thing here, is that we want evidence-based knowledge. We don't want to think of anecdotes or opinions or stories as being data. My first day of graduate school, my very first professor said the very first thing is the plural of anecdote is not data. And that's a really important, I know as a researcher, you probably love that line, that it's really important that we don't see one story about someone who reminds us of ourselves who got sick and maybe didn't make it and think that, oh, wow, that means that's going to happen to me because of I saw this piece on that news cycle that I was watching yesterday. And so sticking to a reliable source of information, not going to social media, reminding ourselves that thoughts are not evidence and that we don't want to confuse someone's opinion with an informed, evidence-based, data-driven report. But that's hard. I mean, that's easy for me to say. That is a really hard thing to do in our culture when we are being inundated with this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, being able to think critically and demand evidence is a really important thing to do, especially when we're under stress. None of us make our best decisions. None of us think the most clearly when we're under a high stress environment. That's just the reality of the way we're designed. And so during these times, it's even more important to be able to accurately view the information and to separate out what is a simple opinion from someone who's providing things that are informed by evidence that they can point to that is data supported. Which, again, I get it. That's a really, really hard thing to do while you're cooking your spaghetti dinner and separating kids who are fighting in the room and trying to figure out how you're going to do your work tomorrow from home. I understand this is a tall ask of people under these circumstances to be able to do that.
But I definitely really like the idea of finding one media source that you trust and make that be your primary source, and then you can gauge whatever else is coming from that source that you've already gotten kind of valid information from, and then critiquing everything else based on that. I think that's a great idea that I'm going to take myself, because I have been watching everything that comes my way and, like my community, getting a little stressed about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think throughout this conversation, what we've been talking about, it almost seems counter to kind of what is suggested. So the language that is being used in the media is social isolation. But it seems like what we need to do is physical distancing and maximize our social connections, because that's what is critical for our mental health. So I was curious to see if you had some comments to mention about that, because I wonder if using the term social distancing is not playing into mental schemas that then are impacting the way we're connecting with our community and those around us. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. This is a time we need to gather together as a community, and that can happen in many different ways. This is where the creativity comes in. My daughter turned 10 on Sunday. We had an online birthday party where her friends gathered on a Zoom call, and they laughed and played for an hour and a half on the call. And so if I were to ask her, did you feel connected? I know the answer will be yes, 100%, that she felt connected. And so this is a time we want to seek out and even cultivate new relationships with people. I think it's just really, really important for us to be able to find ways to access that level of connectedness and support. Because at least in all of our lifetimes, if not in human history, there has never been a time when every person on the planet is facing the same challenge, right? You can think of even the world wars, where there were people who were on the front lines and people who, there are no front lines. They're shifting where the virus goes, but knowing that all of us, I mean, literally all of us, are facing for the first time a common purpose, which is to defeat the virus. This is the time when connectedness is more important than ever before. And again, it involves more creativity. There are more obstacles to being connected. But as I was saying to you off air before, I think that this is going to be an innovation engine. I think that we're going to find a lot of different ways to connect that didn't exist before. New definitions of what connection even means between people. Right now, geography is not an impediment to connection. Whether someone lives next door to you or lives in a different continent than you, we can still connect with them in using basically right now the same device. And so we are in some ways removing geography as an obstacle that has been there throughout human history. And I think in some ways, this might lead us to be more connected. Now, part of it, though, is what do we do when we're connected, right? So the teens right now, even before the pandemic, they were living their lives online. And they're the loneliest generation we've ever studied before. And so there's this great paradox that they're socially connected with their networks, but they're isolated emotionally. And so just like any other vehicle, it's about how do you drive it and where do you go that matters, not the vehicle itself. And so how we use these mediums that we're on right now, that we're going to be on for some time to come, it's about what do we do with them that's going to really fuel the connections. Just having, sending memes like kids are doing right now back and forth is some level of connection. But really we want someone that we can confide in, someone that can support us. We know that social support is most effective when one or both people are being vulnerable. And so allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, because we all are right now anyway, and acknowledging that helps us to have a shared experience. And it's the shared experience which is really the connectedness that we're trying to cultivate so badly here.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Dalton. And now we're going to move to the Q&A.
My favorite question. I love it.
And take your questions. So we're going to go to Alan in the studio to see what questions have come up from you, our viewers, and we'll have Dr. Dalton answer those questions now.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. Thank you so much. We still receiving the question for people, and we have someone who just have a question. The time I receive that question, maybe you will ask another question to doctor, no, because I still waiting, the people still waiting or working on those questions right now. Just you can continue to speak and I will send you those questions using or put those questions on the screen right now. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Alan. And I guess the question I'll have is, we know that the kids are having to learn right now at home, which is very different. But there's also like the stress of this going on. So I guess the question would be, how do you recommend that parents begin to, it's difficult, at least I would think it's difficult to be able to absorb new information, having all of these emotional issues happening now. So what strategies would you recommend for parents, especially when it comes to their kids' education and helping them through studies right now from home in this crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. Patience is number one, is to understand this is affecting kids in very profound ways. And they're not used to learning online. Teachers not used to teaching online. Like you said, there are people who are dealing with a lot of really intense emotions on a daily basis. For parents who are out there, imagine that you're next in line to go skydiving and someone's trying to teach you calculus, right? How hard it will be to concentrate, focus, retain, process the new information. And when kids are going through high emotional states, it's a similar place for them to be in. And so adjusting our expectations is really important. We know that, going back to evolution again, Darwin once said, one of my favorite quotes is that evolution doesn't favor the strongest or even the most intelligent. It favors the most adaptable, right? And so when we're in this situation, we need to adapt to it with our expectations of our kids, with being able to be more patient with them, to deprioritize things like grades right now, because we are teaching them something much more important than whatever subject matter they're learning in school. We're learning that we can be resilient, that we can persevere in the presence of fear, that we can come together as a family and a community to deal with a very scary thing. Those are the lessons the kids are learning right now. And how to conjugate a verb or solve a math equation pales in comparison of importance to the other things they're learning right now.
Okay, I just have a question for the audience right now, and we have Baron Day who say, what advice do you have for illegal immigrant afraid to go get a treatment?
Well, I think that depends on what community you're in. Unfortunately, if you're in Montgomery County, I know that providers are not allowed to ask immigration status, nor are police when they pull someone over or have any interaction with someone. They are not allowed to ask immigration status. So for people here who are undocumented, I think it is critically important to prioritize health above all else. Fear is our biggest enemy right now. That we need to access services, and people are focused on helping other people right now and not asking questions about status or about income level. Right now, it's about taking care of yourself. And if you're in Montgomery County, please know that medical professionals do not ask about immigration status when someone walks in their door in need. They're interested more in your temperature and in your functioning than they are about your last name or what papers you bring in with you. Okay? That's a great question. And I wish that didn't have to be a question, but I understand that it is an important one for a lot of people right now. But please know that it's the people that matter right now. I know a lot of medical professionals, and they would certainly want you to come in and get services right now.
Yes, I have a question for you. And people never stay too long at home. Some people was always go outside. Now with this confinement, some people can become crazy. Last time I went to the I went to the store. I see a long line to people who try to buy a gun. My question is, what you can say to those people in this time who can just have some mental issues, what kind of advice people you can give those people who can become crazy with those situations? And we know a lot of people also lose a job. What we can say to those people?
First thing is, don't buy a gun. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is to seek out help. I know that there is still a stigma about mental health needs. And I think that is even more pronounced in an African immigrant population than it is in other populations. It's important to acknowledge that that's a reality. It's also important to acknowledge that we don't want to become prejudiced against brain-based disorders versus liver disorders or versus heart disorders. That we as people all deal with mental health issues. 1 in 3 Americans in any given year has a diagnosable mental health disorder. They are an indication of our humanity, that we can suffer as individuals, as the Buddhists say, right? Life is suffering. That we can't separate life from suffering because they're too intertwined. We want to acknowledge that. But we also want to acknowledge that much of that suffering is done because people are not accessing services that they could benefit from. And part of that is because of prejudices and misperceptions about what mental health care looks like. Evidence-based mental health care is about teaching people specific skills so they can better manage what they're experiencing. For instance, anxiety disorders. We know that 38% of all girls before the age of 18, 26% of all boys before the age of 18 will have an anxiety disorder. 40 million American adults today in this moment have one, probably actually a lot higher than that in the last month. Realizing that everyone either has a mental health disorder, has had a mental health disorder, or loves someone who has or has had a mental health disorder. And that people deserve treatment. There are very effective treatments that are tragically underutilized in our community. They are very effective. There's no magic wand. There's no silver bullet. It takes effort and commitment. But treatment works. Mental health disorders are real. They are serious. And thank goodness they are treatable. Please get help if you need help. Asking for help is the hardest thing you will ever do. And it takes the most strength, most likely, of anything you will ever be able to do. You know, I asked a kid that I work with once who dealt with a lot of anxiety. I said, finish the sentence for me. I can be anxious and, or I can be depressed and. And she thought about it for a minute. And she said, you know what? I can be anxious and strong. I can be depressed and strong. I can be in pain and I can be strong. I can still pursue my values in the presence of pain and suffering. And that means seeking out appropriate resources and support because you deserve it. The people who love you and count on you deserve it as well. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dalton, for being with us and for giving us all the resources and skills that we need to be able to cope with this pandemic. We're definitely going to make available all the resources that we've gotten from both Dr. Dalton and the Council Member Jawanda's office on our website for you all to be able to access them and or contact us if you have any questions. Thank you so much, Afriquetoday, for live streaming. And we wanted to say, as I mentioned at the beginning, that this is the first in a series of conversations. Our next conversation will be happening actually on Thursday, and it will be focusing on trauma and how to understand, perceive, and kind of manage trauma, especially within the COVID-19 pandemic. So please tune in on Thursday, same time, to be able to learn from, we're going to have a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner be talking to us, Dr. Tamara Rodney. And please check the website for any other details and take care of yourselves. Be safe, be well. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much for viewing.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, yes, I just want to add, if you're watching Afriquetoday, you can, a lot of people doesn't know how to watch Afriquetoday. You can just watch Afriquetoday, download Afriquetoday app. You can also watch Afriquetoday at the same time on Facebook, YouTube, also on our website, www.afriquetoday.com. Thank you. Afrique Today also available on Smart TV. If you have a Roku or Amazon Fire Stick, you can also watch Afrique Today. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you Thursday. Bye.